Natalie Kenway, Global Head of ESG Insights at ESG Clarity, and welcome to the Green Dream video series. Today, I'm joined by Jamie Ross, Fund Manager of the Henderson EuroTrust. Thank you very much for joining me, Jamie.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So Europe has led the Sustainability and Finance Charge. Can you highlight some key points for our readers on why this has been the case?
I think it's really hard to pinpoint why Europe has led the charge, and that would definitely be my perception. You know, when I think about governments, regulators, investors, companies, Europe does seem to be quite far ahead in terms of the thinking on sustainability. Why, though, is really hard to answer. I kind of think almost in a way you need to look back quite far in history, and you know, almost kind of post-war period in Europe, you saw the emergence of a number of kind of more left-leaning governments, some altruistic nature in a way, especially when compared to the US, for example. And then also you have to think about the context of Europe as being a place where, in really simple terms, there's not a lot of space. You know, when compared to a massive amount of space in something like the US, availability of cheap, natural, conventional power sources is quite limited, and we've got a load of beautiful old cities that are not really made for cars to be, you know, driven around. And I think all of those things kind of feed into a social fabric that's always been just a little bit more focused on issues of sustainability, and that social pressure over time feeds to, you know, people vote, it leads to governments, it leads to regulatory action, and over time Europe has become the leader, and that's a very big positive for me as an investor in European equities.
Fantastic. And in terms of ESG, what are you keeping an eye on in terms of market developments in Europe?
So I think you're right to separate this into market developments maybe, and then to move on to kind of regulatory developments. So on the market side of things, I think what will be really interesting is that something which a lot of you will have heard of has just come into action, which is the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regime, long name, SFDR for short. And this is going to be very interesting to see how this develops from a market point of view, because this means that funds that sell into the EU will have to be classified as either Article 6, which is kind of agnostic towards sustainability issues, Article 8, which is known as kind of light green, which will be funds that really have an economic purpose as their main reason for being, but they will also promote some social or some environmental characteristics. And then Article 9, dark green, you know, what we would think of as traditionally as, you know, as more sustainability focused funds. And it'll be really interesting to see how that develops over the next few years. You know, how will it develop? What percentage of funds will go into each category? How will different fund houses choose to present their kind of sustainability credentials and intentions? And also, how will it be monitored? How will adherence be monitored? And I think that, you know, from a market point of view, is something really worth kind of keeping an eye on over the next few years.
Fantastic. And yeah, you touched upon the regulatory developments, and it has been a very busy period. Is there anything else that you're keeping an eye on, maybe the taxonomy or anything else related to that?
Well, we've seen so much, right? I mean, in Europe, we've seen, first of all, everything seems to be based around the kind of European Green Deal. So we've had European Green Deal talking about, you know, the intention to get to net, zero net emissions by 2050, and then a few other bits of, you know, regulatory fabric built around that. You know, the sustainable finance strategy that we heard about earlier this year, which to me is, if I think of in really simple terms, it's an attempt to ensure that the financial system is supporting those European Green Deal aims. So how can we make sure that the financial system is directing private capital towards, you know, infrastructure needed for electrification or whatever it might be. And then, as you mentioned, we've had the EU taxonomy as well, which, again, being really straightforward about these quite complex regulatory documents, the EU taxonomy is all about disclosure. It's all about financial companies and non-financial companies disclosing more so that investors can look at them and say, you're a business model that's adhering to something that I like in the field of sustainability, or you're not. So all of those things, I'm kind of hopeful that there's not huge amounts more regulation for us to deal with, and so hopefully the next few years will be about keeping track of those things. And certainly the sustainable finance strategy, we know that the Commission will report on progress in 2023. So report on how the member states are putting in place measures to ensure that the private financing of sustainability focused businesses is happening. So, that's what I'll be focused on is hopefully not too much more regulation, but how is the current crop of regulatory changes being embedded?
Yes, it will definitely be interesting to see how that pans out. Moving on to the portfolio, can you highlight some of your holdings that have transitioned to a more sustainable business model?
Yeah, sure. And it probably goes without saying, but this is a question I'm far more comfortable addressing really than some of the questions on regulation and on kind of market level things. Because as a fund manager, this is what I do. I look at my stocks, I try and understand the companies I invest in as best as I can. So when we think about some of the companies in the portfolio that have moved to a more sustainable footing, there are many examples I could give. I'll try and limit it to a couple. So the first would be a position we've owned for a long time, which is a Dutch business called DSM. DSM, actually the name itself is suggestive of this, but when the company was founded 100 years ago or so, it was actually a mining company, Dutch State Mines. It was the kind of English version of that phrase. So it was a mining company, and then over time it transitioned to a company that was quite focused on materials and resins and plastics. And over the last 15 years or so, under very capable and managers that I really, really respect, so very capable stewardship, the business has moved towards food ingredients, and in particular, very focused on sustainability of food production, which is something that is a hugely important topic, and one that is, our understanding needs to improve over time, and they're a company at the forefront of innovation in that field. So they've moved from being a mining company, digging stuff out of the ground and selling it, to being a chemicals company, and plastics and not things we would associate with sustainability, to a food ingredients focused business. And that transition has been a multi-decade phenomenon and one that's been very welcome from an investor's point of view. So that'd be one I'd mention. Another one, which is a more recent addition to the portfolio that we bought at IPO a few years ago, is SIG Combibloc. This is a Swiss business that make aseptic packaging. So think of it as, in France, it's the packaging that you would get your milk in a supermarket. In the UK, we might get soup in aseptic packaging, and maybe oat milk and things like that. But essentially, aseptic packaging is a fantastic material to replace the use of plastic, essentially, in a lot of food and drink and markets. And so that the very existence of that business and its large peer, Tetra Pak, the very existence of those businesses really helps to ensure more sustainable supply chains in food and beverages. And the other side of things, there's a social element as well, because in a lot of developing markets, there's not very well established refrigerated supply chain, something we take completely for granted here in the UK or in the US or in Europe. And in the absence of refrigerated supply chains, aseptic packaging is a really essential thing to get very basic food products from one place to another, whilst maintaining the quality of the product itself and how long that product can last for without refrigeration. So those are two examples. As I say, I could name a number more, and I am quite focused on finding businesses that are either performing very strongly on metrics related to sustainability, or businesses that are making substantial improvements. So it's an interesting question to answer. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I would like to throw in one more question on the fund, if that's okay. Can you talk about the ESG criteria that you look for, and are there any exclusions, any sectors or companies that you just won't touch?
Yeah, so there's several things that we do. The first thing I'd say is that sustainability and the analysis of sustainability has always been a big feature of our analysis. So this far predates actually even my time running EuroTrust. We've always been focused on quality companies, and the two almost go hand in hand. So whenever we analyze a company, we are always thinking about sustainability. And then in terms of exclusions, it's something that, over time, I suppose we've moved more towards thinking about exclusions. And, I own, no oil companies. I don't own any mining companies. So there's an element of, my investment approach naturally excludes a number of companies that wouldn't score particularly well on sustainability features. But it's something that we want to go further in that direction and make it clearer to investors that, we will not invest in these certain activities. And so that is something that, over the next 6 months, you'll see more from us on that subject. And the other thing to think about with an investment trust is that I have a board that I report to. I have a board that provides oversight and provides challenge. So something that we've put in place in the last 12 months in a formal way, and that will continue, is that when I invest in any business that scores poorly on ESG metrics, according to some of the big external rating agencies, I will have to explain my position to the board. I'll have to explain why I'm invested in that business, why I see that company improving in terms of its sustainability score and its focus and approach. And the board have the right to tell me to sell something. If they do not see that as a suitable investment, they can tell me not to own it. So there's a number of things, and especially as regulation, some of the things that we discussed earlier, SFDR especially, as regulation changes over the next 12 months, you'll see more from us on this subject, and you'll see us talk more about it. So I very much look forward to updating the market and investors on that.
Fantastic, thank you. And a question we always finish the Green Dream on is, what is your favourite sustainable drink or snack?
Okay, I was mulling this over. It's a tricky one. And there are a number of things that sprung to mind. I was thinking blackberries, because my kids got 3 kids and they kind of forced me to pick them almost every day as soon as they're out. But what I'm going to go for is a maker of kind of organic and plant-based natural ingredient snack bars called Tribe. So I'm a big fan of these. They taste great. You know that it's being manufactured in a sustainable way with the right kind of mindset and controls and balances in place. And even beyond all of that, it's a company that is very altruistic in nature and donates a significant portion. It's quite a small company. It's kind of a startup, but they focus on, at the moment, their charitable giving is focused on modern slavery, and they've donated almost £1 million now towards kind of trying to get rid of modern slavery. So I can see an environmental reason for eating their snacks. I can see a kind of more social responsibility reason, and they taste really good. So that kind of works for me.
Fantastic. That's definitely one we haven't had before, so thank you. And thank you for sharing all of your insights with us. It's been great talking to you.
Anytime. Thank you very much.